Sell the house and give us the money tomorrow, my daughter ordered, slapping me so hard I lost my balance. She handed me a debt of $300,000 from her husband. I smiled and agreed, but 3 hours later, I was already in another country. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The slap came so hard it knocked me sideways into the kitchen counter. At 65, I hadn't been hit by anyone in decades, and certainly never by my own daughter. The sharp crack echoed through my small house like a gunshot, followed by the sound of my coffee mug shattering on the tile floor. "Sell the house and give us the money tomorrow," Riley screamed, her face twisted with an anger I'd never seen before. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into my arm as she shoved a crumpled piece of paper against my chest. $300,000, Dad. Walter owes $300,000 and they want it now. I stood there stunned, my cheek burning where her hand had connected. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike, who used to fall asleep on my lap watching cartoons. Now she towered over me in her expensive heels, her designer purse clutched in one hand like a weapon. "Riley, honey, I don't understand," I managed, my voice shaking. "What happened? How did Walter—" "Gambling," she spat, not letting me finish. "Online poker, sports betting, the casino downtown. He lost everything we had and then some, and now these people are calling our house, showing up at my work. Do you understand what that means for my reputation?" Her reputation, not her marriage, not her family's safety, her reputation. I looked down at the paper she'd thrust at me. It was a printout of some kind of debt statement, the numbers swimming before my eyes as I tried to process what I was seeing. $300,000. The amount hit me like a physical blow. That was more than my house was worth, more than my entire retirement savings. "Riley, I can't just—" Another slap, this one backhanded, catching the other side of my face. "Don't you dare say you can't," she screamed. "You're my father. This is what parents do for their children. You fix things." Walter stood behind her in the doorway, looking like a whipped dog. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled. He wouldn't meet my eyes, just stared at his shoes like a guilty child. This was the man I'd walked down the aisle with my daughter 3 years ago, the successful financial advisor who'd convinced me he'd take care of her forever. "Dad," Riley's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, "these aren't the kind of people who just forget about money. They've already made it clear what happens to people who don't pay. Walter showed me pictures of what they did to the last guy who tried to stiff them." A chill ran down my spine. I'd read about these kinds of operations in the newspaper, the violent collection methods of illegal gambling rings, but those were stories about other people, not my family. "How long do we have?" I asked quietly. "Tomorrow." Walter finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "They want it by tomorrow afternoon or—" He trailed off, but I could see the fear in his eyes. I felt something break inside me then, not just my heart, but something deeper. The last thread of hope that my family actually cared about me as anything more than a source of money. This wasn't the first time Riley had come to me with her hand out, but it was certainly the most violent. Over the years, there had been the emergency car repairs that turned out to be upgrades to luxury vehicles, the medical bills that were actually cosmetic procedures, the investment opportunities that somehow never paid dividends. Each time I'd given her what she asked for because she was my daughter, and that's what fathers do. But this felt different. This felt like extortion. "I need time to think," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Riley grabbed my shirt collar, pulling my face close to hers. I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the sharp scent of desperation. "There is no time to think, old man. You sell this house tomorrow morning and you give us that money, or we're all going to have problems. Do you understand me?" I nodded slowly, my hands trembling. "I understand." She released me with a shove that sent me stumbling backward. "Good. We'll be back tomorrow at 5 o'clock for the money. Have it ready." She turned on her heel and marched toward the door, Walter trailing behind her like a beaten dog. "And Dad?" she called over her shoulder without turning around. "Don't even think about trying to hide from this. We know where you live, where you shop, where you get your hair cut. There's nowhere you can go that we won't find you." The front door slammed shut with enough force to rattle the windows. I stood alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the broken pieces of my coffee mug and the shattered remains of my relationship with my daughter. My cheek throbbed where she'd hit me, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. I walked slowly to the window and watched as Riley's BMW pulled out of my driveway, tires squealing against the asphalt. $300,000. I owned this house outright, had paid off the mortgage 5 years ago with my pension from the factory. It was worth maybe $250,000 in today's market. Certainly not the full amount they needed, but Riley didn't care about the details. She just knew her father had assets, and she intended to take them. I picked up the pieces of the broken mug with shaking hands, my mind already racing. She was right about one thing. I did need to sell the house, but not for the reason she thought. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of something I hadn't experienced since my wife died. Determination. Riley and Walter had made a crucial mistake. They'd assumed I was just a weak old man who would roll over and give them whatever they demanded. They had no idea what I was really capable of. As I swept up the last of the ceramic shards, I was already making plans. Tomorrow they would come back expecting their money, expecting their beaten-down father and father-in-law to hand over his life savings like the obedient bank they'd always treated him as. Instead, they were going to find an empty house and a very expensive lesson about what happens when you push someone too far. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I felt Riley's hand connecting with my face, heard her voice calling me an old man, like I was some disposable nuisance. By 4 a.m, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, researching real estate agents and international banking procedures. The plan that formed in my mind was both simple and radical. Riley wanted me to sell the house, fine, I'd sell it. But not one penny would end up in Walter's gambling-addicted hands or Riley's designer purse. At 7:30, I called Janet Morrison, the real estate agent who'd helped me buy this place 20 years ago. She was probably the only person in town who could move a property quickly without asking too many questions. "Richard, my goodness, it's been years," Janet's cheerful voice came through the phone. "What can I do for you?" "I need to sell my house today," I said without preamble. "Full asking price, cash only, and I need to close by this afternoon." There was a pause. "Richard, that's not really how real estate works. Even with a cash buyer, there are inspections, paperwork, title searches." "Janet, I'm 75 years old," I lied smoothly, aging myself by 10 years. "I just got some medical news that's going to require immediate treatment overseas. I need to liquidate everything quickly and quietly. I'll take $200,000 cash, no inspection, as is sale. You keep your commission plus an extra $10,000 for the rush job." I could practically hear her calculating the money in her head. $30,000 for a few hours of work was too good to pass up. "Let me make some calls," she said finally. "I might know someone." While Janet worked her magic, I drove to 3 different banks, withdrawing the maximum daily limit from each of my accounts. By noon, I had nearly $15,000 in cash stuffed into an old gym bag. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to get started. My phone rang constantly throughout the morning. Riley checking up on me, making sure I was handling things. I let every call go to voicemail, her increasingly frantic messages growing more threatening with each one. "Dad, you better not be getting cold feet. I swear to God if you're not ready when we get there." "This isn't a game, old man. People are depending on this money. Important people. Dad, please pick up the phone. I'm scared. These people Walter owes, they're not going to wait much longer." That last message almost broke my resolve. The fear in her voice reminded me of the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. But then I remembered the feeling of her hand across my face, the way she'd grabbed my shirt like I was some street thug she was shaking down. Janet called back at 2 o'clock with news that seemed too good to be true. She'd found a cash buyer, some investment company that flipped houses for rental properties. They'd transfer $200,000 to my account by 3:30, no questions asked. "This is highly irregular, Richard," Janet warned me. "Are you sure about this? Once we sign these papers, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I said, my hand unconsciously touching my still sore cheek. More sure than I've been about anything in years. The closing was a blur of signatures and bank transfers. By 4 o'clock, I owned nothing except the clothes on my back, a gym bag full of cash, and a newly opened account at an international bank with a $200,000 balance. I drove straight to the airport, leaving my car in long-term parking with a note on the dashboard donating it to charity. The 5:15 flight to Lisbon had exactly 1 seat left in economy class, and I bought it with cash at the gate. As the plane taxied down the runway, I turned on my phone one last time to send Riley a text message. "House sold, money safe, don't look for me." Then I powered off the phone and dropped it in the seat pocket in front of me. Let her try to track that. The relief that washed over me as the plane lifted off was unlike anything I'd felt since my wife passed away. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't worried about what Riley might need next, what crisis would require my financial intervention, what new way she'd find to make me feel guilty for not giving enough. The flight attendant offered me a drink, and I ordered a whiskey, the good stuff, not the cheap brand I usually bought at home. At 30,000 feet, watching the American coastline disappear below me, I raised my glass in a silent toast to my new life. Portugal had always been on my bucket list, one of those places Helen and I had planned to visit before the cancer took her. She would have loved the irony of this situation, her practical husband finally doing something spontaneous, something just for himself. I pulled out the travel guidebook I'd grabbed at the airport and began reading about Lisbon. Ancient castles, coastal views, a cost of living low enough that my money would last for years. It sounded like paradise compared to the prison my life had become. Somewhere over the Atlantic, exhaustion finally caught up with me. I dozed fitfully, dreaming of Riley as a child, teaching her to swim in our backyard pool. In the dream, she was laughing and calling me the best daddy in the world. I woke with tears on my cheeks. The plane touched down in Lisbon at 8 in the morning local time. Portuguese immigration barely glanced at my passport, just another American retiree looking for a quiet place to spend his golden years, if only they knew. I found a small hotel near the airport and paid for a week in advance. The room was tiny but clean, with a window that looked out over red-tiled roofs and narrow cobblestone streets. It was perfect. For the first time in 24 hours, I allowed myself to really think about what I'd done. I'd abandoned my entire life, cut all ties with my only family, and fled to a foreign country where I didn't speak the language. Most people would call it the desperate act of a broken man. To me, it felt like freedom. I opened the hotel window and breathed in the unfamiliar air, salt from the nearby ocean mixed with the smell of fresh bread from a bakery down the street. Somewhere in America, Riley and Walter were probably standing in my empty house, realizing that their personal ATM had finally run dry. Let them figure out their own problems for once. I had a new life to build. I'd been in Lisbon for exactly 24 hours when they found me. The previous day had been the most peaceful I'd experienced in years. I'd wandered the narrow streets of the Alfama district, sat in small cafes drinking coffee that actually tasted like coffee, and even managed to have a broken conversation with an elderly Portuguese man about the weather. For the first time since Helen died, I felt like I might actually be happy again. I was returning to my hotel that evening, arms full of groceries from the local market, when I saw the familiar silhouette standing by the front desk. My blood turned to ice. Riley was talking to the desk clerk in her sharp, demanding voice, gesturing with her manicured hands like she owned the place. Walter stood behind her, looking even more haggard than he had 2 days ago. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair greasy, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting desperation. I ducked behind a pillar in the lobby, my heart hammering against my ribs. How had they found me so quickly? I'd paid cash for everything, used no credit cards, left no digital trail. But there they were in my sanctuary, like a nightmare that followed you into your dreams. "Look, I know he's here," Riley was saying to the poor desk clerk, her voice rising with each word. "Richard Thompson, 65 years old, American, probably checked in yesterday or today. This is his daughter, and I'm telling you it's a family emergency." The clerk, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20, looked bewildered by this aggressive American woman who'd invaded his quiet hotel. "Senora, I cannot give information about guests without what? Without proof?" Riley slammed her passport down on the marble counter. "This is proof. Look at the last name, Thompson, same as him. My father is sick, and he doesn't know it yet. We flew all the way from America to help him." I almost laughed at the irony. Riley claiming she'd flown here to help me, when just 2 days ago she'd been slapping me around my own kitchen. The desk clerk was weakening. I could see it in his posture, the way he kept glancing between Riley's passport and his computer screen. Riley had that effect on people. She could wear them down with sheer force of will and manufactured urgency. "Room 307, the clerk finally whispered. "But please, Senora, keep quiet. Other guests." Riley was already heading for the elevator before he finished speaking. Walter shuffled behind her, clutching what looked like legal documents in his sweaty hands. I waited until the elevator doors closed, then approached the desk. The young clerk looked mortified when he saw me. "Senor Thompson, I am so sorry." The woman, she was very insistent, and she said family emergency. "It's not your fault," I said quietly, already pulling money from my wallet. "Is there a back exit?" He nodded toward a hallway behind the main desk. "Service entrance. Goes to the alley behind the building." I handed him €200, more than twice what I owed for the room. "If anyone asks, you never saw me leave." He pocketed the money gratefully and pointed me toward the exit. "Boa sorte, senor. Good luck." I slipped out through the service door into a narrow alley that smelled of garbage and motor oil. Above me, I could hear voices on the 3rd floor, Riley's shrill tones echoing off the hotel's courtyard walls. She was probably pounding on the door of room 307 right about now, demanding that I open up and face the music. Let her pound. I was done dancing to her tune. I walked quickly through the maze of Lisbon's old streets, my mind racing. How had they tracked me down so fast? Then it hit me, the bank transfer. Janet Morrison might have kept quiet about the cash sale, but the bank transfer to my international account would have left a digital footprint. Riley had probably hired some kind of investigator, someone who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. The thought made my stomach turn. If they'd found me this quickly in a city of over 500,000 people, nowhere was safe. They had resources I'd underestimated, connections I hadn't considered. I needed help, and I needed it fast. I found an internet cafe near the Rocio Square and paid cash for an hour of computer time. My fingers shook as I typed, searching for information about financial privacy laws in Portugal, about what rights I had as an American citizen trying to escape family harassment. The more I read, the more hopeless it seemed. Riley and Walter weren't technically doing anything illegal by following me to Portugal. They weren't threatening me with physical violence, not in any way that could be proven. They were just a concerned daughter and son-in-law trying to reconnect with an elderly family member who'd had some kind of breakdown. That's how they'd sell it to anyone who asked anyway. My phone, a cheap burner I'd bought at the Lisbon airport, buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Found your hotel room. You can't run forever, Dad. We need to talk. Room 307 at the Pension Centrale. Come back now and let's work this out like adults. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me, the part that had been trained by 40 years of marriage and parenthood to be reasonable and accommodating, wanted to go back. Maybe Riley was right. Maybe we could work something out like adults. Then I remembered the feeling of her hand across my face, the way she'd grabbed my shirt collar, the look in her eyes when she'd called me an old man. That wasn't the behavior of someone interested in adult conversation. I deleted the message and kept researching. By the time I left the internet cafe, it was nearly midnight. I'd booked a room at a small guest house in a different part of the city, paying cash again and using a false name. The elderly woman who ran the place didn't ask for identification, just smiled and handed me a key to a room on the second floor. As I climbed the narrow stairs, my legs felt like lead. I was exhausted, not just from the day's events, but from the constant state of alertness I'd been living in since leaving America. This wasn't the peaceful retirement I'd imagined when I'd bought that plane ticket. I lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of Lisbon at night, distant fado music from a nearby restaurant, the rumble of late trams, voices speaking in rapid Portuguese. It should have been soothing, but all I could think about was how they'd found me so easily. Riley had always been persistent when she wanted something. As a child, she'd worn down her mother and me with pure determination, asking for the same thing over and over until we gave in just to have some peace. But this felt different. This felt obsessive. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Whatever you think you're accomplishing by hiding, it's not going to work. Walter's people aren't going to wait forever. They're starting to ask questions about where you are, and I can only stall them so long. Come back tomorrow or things are going to get complicated for all of us. I turned off the phone and shoved it under the mattress. Let her send messages to dead air. I wasn't playing this game anymore. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, one thought kept nagging at me. If they'd found me once, they could find me again, and next time, I might not be lucky enough to slip out the back door. I woke to the sound of voices in the hallway outside my room. Familiar voices. Are you sure this is the right place? Walter's nervous tenor carried through the thin door. I'm sure, Riley replied, her voice sharp with exhaustion and frustration. The bank transaction this morning was from this neighborhood. He's here somewhere. My blood froze. They weren't just persistent, they were systematic. They'd tracked my new bank account, narrowed down my location, and were now going door to door looking for me. I grabbed my few belongings and stuffed them into my bag, moving as quietly as possible. The voices were getting closer, Riley's demands becoming more insistent as she questioned other guests and staff. The window in my room overlooked a narrow side street. It was a 15-foot drop to the cobblestones below, but it was better than the alternative. As I lowered myself out the window, hanging by my fingertips from the sill, I could hear Riley's voice directly outside my door. Excuse me, we're looking for an elderly American man. Tall, gray hair, probably seems confused or disoriented. I dropped to the street below, my knees screaming in protest. At 65, I wasn't built for midnight escapes through hotel windows, but I was learning that desperate times called for desperate measures, and I was definitely desperate. They'd been in Lisbon for a week now, and I was running out of places to hide. Every morning brought a new hotel, a new neighborhood, a new attempt to stay one step ahead of Riley and Walter's relentless search. I'd learned to pay cash for everything, to avoid the tourist areas where an American accent might stand out, to keep my head down and blend in with the local population. But they were learning too. I discovered just how much they'd learned when I walked into a small cafe in the Barrio Alto district and found Walter sitting at a corner table, scrolling through what looked like bank statements on his phone. He glanced up as I entered, and our eyes met across the cramped space. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Walter's face broke into something that might have been relief if it weren't so predatory. "Richard," he called out, loud enough for the entire cafe to hear. "Thank God we found you. We've been so worried." The other patrons looked up from their coffee and pastries, suddenly interested in the drama unfolding in their quiet morning routine. I could see it in their faces, the assumption that this was a concerned family member reuniting with a confused elderly relative who'd wandered off. I turned to leave, but Riley appeared in the doorway behind me, blocking my exit. She looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail, her expensive clothes wrinkled from sleeping in cheap hotels. But her eyes burned with the same desperate intensity that had driven her to slap me in my own kitchen. "Dad," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of worried affection for our audience. "We've been looking everywhere for you. Are you okay? You left so suddenly, we were afraid something had happened." The cafe owner, a middle-aged Portuguese woman, watched this reunion with obvious sympathy. "Ah, families," she murmured to another customer. "Sometimes the elderly, they get confused, you know?" Riley seized on this immediately. "Yes, exactly. My father has been under a lot of stress lately. Medical issues, financial concerns. We think he had some kind of episode." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell everyone in that cafe exactly what kind of medical issue had driven me to flee my own country, the kind that came from being physically assaulted by your own daughter. But what would be the point? These strangers would believe what they wanted to believe, and Riley had always been better at playing victim than I was. "We need to talk," Walter said, standing up from his table, privately. He walked toward me, and I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The legal documents in his hand weren't the gambling debts he'd shown me back home. These were fresh, printed on Portuguese legal letterhead. "What are those?" I asked, hating how my voice shook. Riley smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Guardianship papers. We've been talking to some very helpful people at the American consulate about elderly Americans who might be experiencing cognitive decline while abroad." The words hit me like a physical blow. Guardianship. They were trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. "You see, Dad," Riley continued, her voice sticky sweet for the benefit of our audience, "when a 65-year-old man suddenly liquidates all his assets and flees the country without telling anyone, it raises concerns about his mental state, especially when that man has been exhibiting signs of confusion and poor judgment." "I'm not confused," I said through gritted teeth. "I'm escaping." "Escaping from what?" Walter asked, spreading his hands in a gesture of innocent confusion. "From family who love you? From people who want to help you through a difficult time?" The cafe patrons were watching this exchange with growing interest. I could see them nodding along with Riley and Walter's version of events, the concerned family members trying to help their elderly patriarch, who'd obviously suffered some kind of breakdown. "We've already spoken to your doctor back home," Riley continued. "Dr. Martinez was very concerned when we told him about your sudden behavior change. He agrees that you need professional evaluation." I stared at her in shock. Dr. Martinez was my family physician, a man I'd known for 15 years. "You contacted my doctor? You had no right." "We had every right," Walter interrupted, waving the legal documents. "As your closest family members, we have a responsibility to ensure your well-being, and right now, your well-being is clearly at risk." The trap was closing around me, and I could see exactly how they'd planned it. They'd told everyone back home that I'd had some kind of mental breakdown, that I'd disappeared with all my money in a fit of confusion or early dementia. They'd probably even convinced themselves that it was true. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, keeping my voice low but steady. "I am not confused. I am not having a breakdown. I sold my house and left the country because you two have been using me as your personal bank account for years, and I finally got tired of it." Riley's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold fury underneath. "That's exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that proves you need help, Dad. We've never used you for anything. We're your family." "You slapped me," I said flatly. "You demanded $300,000 to pay Walter's gambling debts, and when I hesitated, you slapped me across the face in my own kitchen." The cafe had gone completely silent. Everyone was listening now, trying to parse this family drama that had suddenly escalated beyond uncomfortable into something darker. Walter laughed, but it sounded forced. "Richard, that's not what happened at all. You're confused about the timeline. Yes, I made some poor financial decisions, and yes, we asked for your help, but violence, never. You're mixing up reality with with something else. He was good, I had to give him that. He delivered the line with just the right mixture of sadness and concern, like a man watching his father-in-law's mind slowly slip away. The guardianship hearing is scheduled for next week, Riley added. We've already provided statements to the Portuguese authorities about your condition. They're very understanding about these situations involving elderly tourists. Next week, they'd been busy while I was running around Lisbon trying to stay ahead of them. They'd been building a legal case, creating an official narrative where I was the confused old man, and they were the heroic family members trying to save me from myself. I won't let you do this, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I could hear how empty they sounded. You don't have a choice, Riley replied. The papers are already filed. By this time next week, either you come home with us voluntarily or we'll have legal authority to make that decision for you. The cafe owner approached our table, looking concerned. Disculpe, but perhaps this conversation would be better in private. You are disturbing other customers. Riley immediately switched into her charming mode, the one she'd perfected during her years as a corporate wife. Of course, so sorry. We're just worried about my father. He's been missing for several days. Missing? The woman's eyebrows rose with alarm. Not missing exactly, Walter clarified quickly. Just wandering. He gets confused sometimes, forgets where he is. It's very common with people his age. I watched in horror as this stranger's expression shifted from curiosity to pity. In the span of 30 seconds, I'd gone from being a customer to being a sad case study in elderly decline. There is a place nearby, the cafe owner said gently. A residence for people who need assistance. Very nice place, very caring staff. That's very kind, Riley said, but we're planning to take him home where he can get proper care. Home. The word felt like a noose tightening around my neck. Home to what? To being Riley's personal ATM again? To watching Walter gamble away whatever money they could squeeze out of me? To pretending that everything was normal while they slowly bled me dry? I need some air, I said, standing abruptly. Of course, Riley said, standing as well. We'll come with you. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. I need a moment alone to process all this. I could see the calculation in Riley's eyes. Let me go and risk losing me again, or create a scene by insisting on following me. She chose to let me go, probably figuring that with the legal papers already filed, she could afford to be magnanimous. Don't go far, Dad, she called after me as I headed for the door. We have a lot to discuss. I stepped out into the bright Lisbon sunshine, my mind reeling. A week. I had 1 week before they could legally force me back into the life I'd fought so hard to escape. But as I walked aimlessly through the narrow streets, a new determination began to take shape. They thought they had me cornered, thought they'd covered all the angles. They'd underestimated me before, and they were about to do it again. I wasn't going down without a fight. I was sitting on a bench in the Miraduro da Senhora do Monte, staring out over the red rooftops of Lisbon when she found me. Not Riley this time, but someone I'd never seen before, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Senor Thompson, she said in accented but perfect English. My name is Sofia Carvalho. I'm an attorney specializing in elder protection law. I believe we need to talk. I looked up at her warily. After a week of being hunted through the streets of Lisbon by my own daughter, I'd learned not to trust strangers who knew my name. Who sent you? I asked. She sat down beside me without invitation, opening a leather briefcase and pulling out a tablet. Maria Santos, the owner of the Café do Barro, where you had your encounter with your family this morning. She's my neighbor, and she was very disturbed by what she witnessed. I remembered the cafe owner, the way her expression had shifted from sympathy to something that might have been suspicion, as she listened to Riley and Walter's performance. Maria has seen this before, Sophia continued, scrolling through something on her tablet. Adult children who come to Portugal claiming their elderly parents are confused or incompetent, usually when significant money is involved. It's more common than you might think. So you're what, some kind of guardian angel for confused old men? Sophia smiled, but it was grim. I'm a lawyer who specializes in protecting vulnerable adults from financial exploitation and abuse, and from what Maria described, you may be in need of protection. She turned the tablet toward me, showing me a web page in Portuguese with official-looking seals and logos. Your daughter and son-in-law filed a guardianship petition with the Portuguese courts yesterday. They're claiming you're suffering from dementia and are incapable of managing your own affairs. The words on the screen blurred as I tried to process what I was seeing. Even though Riley had warned me this was coming, seeing it in official legal documents made it feel terrifyingly real. Can they do that? I mean, legally? Unfortunately, yes. Portugal has reciprocal agreements with the United States regarding the care of citizens abroad. If they can convince a judge that you're mentally incompetent and a danger to yourself, they can be granted temporary guardianship to facilitate your return to the United States. My hands clenched into fists. But I'm not incompetent. I'm not confused. I just wanted to get away from them. Sophia studied me carefully, her lawyer's eyes taking in every detail. Tell me what really happened, from the beginning. So I did. I told her about the years of financial demands, about Walter's gambling addiction, about the $300,000 in debt they'd dumped in my lap. I told her about Riley's violence, about the slap that had knocked me into my kitchen counter, about the way she'd grabbed my shirt and called me an old man. Sophia listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on her tablet. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Do you have any evidence of these financial demands? Bank records, canceled checks, anything documenting the money you've given them over the years? I shook my head. I never thought I'd need evidence. She's my daughter. I trusted her. What about the assault? Any witnesses? Photos of injuries? Again, I shook my head. It happened in my kitchen. We were alone. Sophia sighed. This is the problem with family abuse cases. The perpetrators know exactly how to avoid leaving evidence. They know their victims won't report them, won't document the abuse, because of family loyalty. So there's nothing I can do? They're just going to drag me back to America and take control of my money? Not necessarily. Sophia closed her tablet and turned to face me fully. The burden of proof is on them to demonstrate that you're incompetent. And from our conversation, you're clearly lucid, rational, and capable of making your own decisions. But they have statements from my doctor, testimony about my sudden departure from the country. They're going to paint it as erratic behavior. Yes, but we can paint it as the rational response of an abuse victim finally escaping his tormentors. Sophia's voice took on a harder edge. And we can also investigate their true motives for pursuing you so aggressively. She pulled out her phone and showed me a series of text messages. Maria saved these. Your daughter sent them to the cafe this morning asking if you'd returned. Look at the language she uses. I read the messages, my stomach sinking with each one. Has the old man come back? We need to locate him immediately. Time is running out. People are asking questions about the money. If he doesn't surface soon, we're all going to have serious problems. Those don't sound like messages from a concerned daughter, Sophia observed. They sound like messages from someone who's under pressure from dangerous people and needs access to someone else's money to solve their problems. I thought about Walter's gambling debts, about the people Riley had mentioned who weren't the kind to forget about money owed. She said the creditors were getting impatient, that there would be consequences if the debt wasn't paid soon. Which explains why they followed you to Portugal instead of just writing you off as a loss. They don't just want your money, they need it desperately. Sophia stood up, tucking her tablet back into her briefcase. I'm going to propose something that might sound extreme, but I think it's your best option. I'm listening. We're going to flip the script. Instead of waiting for them to prove you're incompetent, we're going to file a criminal complaint against them for elder abuse, extortion, and international harassment. My breath caught. Can we do that? Elder abuse is a serious crime in Portugal, especially when it involves financial exploitation. And the fact that they followed you across international borders to continue their harassment actually strengthens our case. She handed me a business card with her contact information. But I need you to understand, if we do this, there's no going back. You'll be burning bridges with your family permanently. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Riley's hand across my face, about Walter's desperate eyes as he handed me his gambling debts, about the years of being treated like nothing more than a walking bank account. Then I thought about the peace I'd felt during those first 24 hours in Lisbon before they'd found me. Yes, I said firmly. I'm prepared for that. Sophia nodded approvingly. Good. We'll need to move quickly. The guardianship hearing is scheduled for next week, so we need to file our complaint and gather evidence before then. What kind of evidence? Bank records showing the pattern of financial demands over the years. Documentation of their current financial situation, Walter's gambling debts, their own assets and income, witness statements about their behavior since arriving in Portugal. Sophia paused. And we'll need you to undergo a psychological evaluation to prove your mental competence. The thought of being examined by psychiatrists, of having my sanity officially verified, should have been humiliating. Instead, it felt liberating. Let them test me. Let them ask me any questions they wanted. I knew exactly who I was and what I was doing. When do we start? Now. Sophia pulled out her phone. I'm calling a colleague who specializes in international criminal law. We're going to file an emergency injunction to prevent them from leaving the country with you while we investigate their claims. As she made the call, speaking rapid Portuguese into her phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. For the first time since Riley had slapped me in my kitchen, I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was fighting back. My phone buzzed with another message from Riley. "Dad, we need to talk. This situation is getting out of hand, and people are starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Come back to the hotel tonight and we'll work something out." I showed the message to Sophia when she finished her call. She read it and smiled coldly. "Perfect. That's exactly the kind of pressure tactic we can use in court. Save that message, and any others she sends. Every communication from them now is potential evidence." As we walked down from the viewpoint toward the city center, I realized something had fundamentally changed. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I wasn't alone. I had someone on my side, someone who understood what was really happening and had the tools to fight it. Riley and Walter thought they had me cornered, thought their legal maneuvering had left me no choice but to surrender. They were about to learn that cornering a desperate man wasn't the same as defeating him, and I was far from defeated. The courtroom in downtown Lisbon was smaller than I'd expected, but it felt enormous as I sat beside Sophia, waiting for the judge to review our emergency filing. Across the aisle, Riley and Walter sat with their own attorney, a nervous-looking man who kept shuffling through papers and whispering urgently to his clients. Riley looked different than she had that morning at the cafe. Gone was the concerned daughter act. Now she looked like what she really was, a desperate woman watching her carefully constructed plans fall apart. "All rise," the court clerk announced in Portuguese, followed by an English translation for the benefit of the American parties. Judge Ana Pereira entered the courtroom, a stern woman in her 60s whose reputation Sophia had briefed me on during our preparation. She specialized in elder protection cases and had little patience for family members who tried to exploit the Portuguese legal system for financial gain. "This is an unusual case," Judge Pereira began, switching between Portuguese and English as she addressed both legal teams. "We have a guardianship petition filed by family members claiming incompetence, countered by criminal charges of elder abuse and extortion. Let's start with the guardianship petition." Riley and Walter's attorney stood up, clearing his throat nervously. "Your Honor, my clients are concerned about Senor Thompson's sudden and erratic behavior. He liquidated all his assets without warning, fled the country, and has been exhibiting signs of paranoia and confusion. And what evidence do you have of this alleged incompetence?" The attorney shuffled through his papers. "We have statements from his physician in America expressing concern about his mental state, documentation of his sudden financial decisions, and testimony from his family about his erratic behavior." Judge Pereira looked unimpressed. "What specific medical diagnosis supports a claim of incompetence?" More paper shuffling. "Well, his doctor expressed concerns, but there's no formal diagnosis yet. That's why we're seeking guardianship, to ensure he gets proper medical evaluation." "I see. And what is the urgency that requires emergency guardianship rather than normal proceedings?" Riley's attorney glanced back at his clients, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "My clients are concerned that Senor Thompson may make additional poor financial decisions if left unsupervised." Sophia stood up smoothly. "Your Honor, may I present our evidence regarding the true motivation behind this guardianship petition?" Judge Pereira nodded, and Sophia approached the bench with a thick folder. "These are bank records showing a pattern of financial exploitation spanning over 3 years. Senor Thompson's daughter and son-in-law have extracted approximately $400,000 from him during this period, with increasingly aggressive demands culminating in the violent confrontation that prompted his departure from America." I watched Riley's face go pale as Sophia continued. "We also have documentation showing that Walter Thompson owes significant gambling debts to potentially dangerous creditors, and that the couple is facing financial ruin if they cannot access Senor Thompson's money. These are serious allegations," Judge Pereira said. "What evidence supports claims of violence?" Sophia produced her tablet, showing the text messages Riley had sent to the cafe owner. "These messages show a pattern of predatory behavior and urgent financial pressure. Additionally, we have witness testimony from Maria Santos, who observed the confrontation at her establishment and noted behavior consistent with financial coercion." Riley's attorney tried to object, but Sophia wasn't finished. "Most importantly, Your Honor, we have the results of a comprehensive psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Fernando Silva, a court-approved psychiatrist. The evaluation shows that Senor Thompson is fully competent, rational, and capable of making his own decisions." She handed a thick report to the judge. "Dr. Silva's conclusion is that Senor Thompson's departure from America was not the result of mental incompetence, but rather the rational response of an abuse victim finally escaping his tormentors." Judge Pereira spent several minutes reviewing the psychological evaluation, her expression growing more stern with each page. Finally, she looked up at Riley and Walter's attorney. Do your clients have any response to these allegations of financial exploitation and abuse? The attorney looked back at Riley and Walter, who were whispering urgently to each other. Walter was shaking his head violently while Riley gripped his arm, her knuckles white with tension. Your Honor, the attorney said finally, my clients deny any wrongdoing. They maintain that they were simply asking for family financial assistance during a difficult time. Family assistance? Judge Pereira's voice carried a sharp edge. According to these bank records, your clients extracted the equivalent of nearly $400,000 over 3 years. That seems excessive for assistance. Riley suddenly stood up, ignoring her attorney's attempt to stop her. Your Honor, with all due respect, my father is my family. Everything I did was because I love him and I'm worried about him. Yes, my husband made some mistakes, but that doesn't mean we were exploiting anyone. Judge Pereira studied Riley carefully. Senorita Thompson, did you physically strike your father during your last conversation in America? Riley's composure finally cracked. It wasn't like that. He was being unreasonable and it was barely a tap. He's exaggerating because he's confused. So you did strike him? It wasn't, Riley looked around the courtroom desperately, realizing she'd just admitted to assault. He's making it sound worse than it was. Judge Pereira made a note on her pad. And is it true that your husband owes approximately $300,000 in gambling debts? Walter finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Your Honor, but that's not. We never meant for it to go this far. Yet you followed Senor Thompson to Portugal to pursue these funds. We were worried about him, Riley insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. We just wanted to make sure he was safe. Sophia stood again. Your Honor, if I may present one final piece of evidence. She produced her phone, showing a recording app. This is a voicemail Senorita Thompson left for her father yesterday evening. She played the recording, and Riley's voice filled the courtroom. Dad, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but it ends now. Walter's people are getting impatient, and I can't protect you if you don't cooperate. Come back tonight or I can't be responsible for what happens next. The courtroom fell silent. Even Riley's attorney looked stunned by the obvious threat in his client's voice. Judge Pereira set down her pen and looked directly at Riley and Walter. Based on the evidence presented, I am not only denying the guardianship petition, but I am also issuing an emergency protective order. Senorita Thompson and Senor Walter Thompson are prohibited from contacting Senor Richard Thompson in any way. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the criminal prosecutor for investigation of elder abuse, extortion, and making threats. Riley jumped to her feet. You can't do this. He's my father. We have rights. Your rights end where criminal behavior begins, Judge Pereira replied coldly. You have 24 hours to leave Portugal. If you are found to be in violation of this protective order, you will be arrested and held pending criminal charges. Walter grabbed Riley's arm, trying to pull her back to her seat, but she shook him off. This is insane. You're believing the lies of a confused old man over his own family. Bailiff, Judge Pereira called, and a uniformed officer stepped forward. Please escort these individuals from my courtroom. As Riley was led away, she turned back to look at me one last time. The mask was completely gone now, revealing the desperate, angry woman underneath. This isn't over, Dad, she called out. You can't hide forever. But it was over. I could feel it in the finality of the judge's words, in the way Sophia squeezed my shoulder in victory, in the profound relief that washed over me as the courtroom doors closed behind my daughter and son-in-law. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a small restaurant in Porto, 200 miles north of Lisbon, reading an email from Sophia on my new Portuguese phone. Riley and Walter had been deported as ordered and were facing federal charges in the United States for international harassment and elder abuse. Walter's gambling creditors had apparently decided to cut their losses and move on to easier targets. I'd used some of my remaining money to buy a small apartment overlooking the Douro River. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, a balcony just big enough for a chair and a small table. But it was mine, completely and legally mine, and no one could take it away from me. I'd also done something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I'd legally changed my name. Richard Thompson no longer existed in any official capacity. I was now Ricardo Santos, a retired American living quietly in Portugal on a residence visa. The old Richard Thompson had been Riley's father, Riley's victim, Riley's personal bank account. Ricardo Santos was just a man who liked morning coffee on his balcony, evening walks along the river, and the simple pleasure of knowing that no one could find him who didn't already know where to look. I pulled out a piece of paper and began writing a letter I'd been composing in my mind for weeks. To my former family, I want you to know that I don't hate you. I understand that desperation makes people do terrible things, and I understand that Walter's gambling addiction put you in an impossible situation. But understanding something doesn't mean I have to accept it, and it doesn't mean I have to sacrifice my own peace and security to fix problems that were never mine to begin with. I spent 3 years being your solution to every crisis, your answer to every financial emergency. I gave you nearly $500,000 because I thought that's what family did for each other. It took me far too long to realize that family is supposed to be a two-way street. I'm not angry anymore, I'm just free. For the first time since your mother died, I wake up each morning without wondering what crisis will require my attention today, what emergency will drain my bank account, what guilt trip will convince me to sacrifice my own well-being for yours. I hope you find a way to solve your problems that doesn't involve destroying other people. I hope Walter gets help for his addiction and that you find happiness that doesn't depend on other people's money. But I won't be part of that journey. I've found my own path now, and it leads away from you. Ricardo Santos, formerly Richard Thompson. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into an envelope, then walked to the river and dropped it into the flowing water. I watched it float away toward the ocean, carrying with it the last remnants of the man I used to be. The sun was setting over Porto, painting the ancient buildings in shades of gold and orange. Somewhere in America, Riley and Walter were probably struggling with the consequences of their choices, but that was their story now, not mine. Mine was just beginning.